This is a picture of a duck looking up and to the right, with I guess a fat bottom lip. It's a crudely drawn duck, but I'm confident you can see it. If you've seen this before, you know there's a twist. This isn't only a duck, it's also a rabbit looking to the left. If you give it a few seconds, you should be able to see the rabbit too. This little duck rabbit is going to help us understand the nature of political divides, and I'm going to spend the rest of the video explaining how that works. If you think about the subjects that we're divided over, they're subjects that have a social element to them. So we don't tend to fight over things that are purely physical, like say the properties of water. With purely physical subjects, we tend to be open to evidence, and we tend to converge on a common understanding of that issue. But when you bring in a social element, the picture can change. Like if I said that ocean levels will rise over time and eventually pose a threat to coastal communities. Even just that bit about rising water levels might have triggered in you a flash of negativity, and you might have started wondering who I am and what I'm getting at. In other words, mental guards in your head started to go up, however subconsciously. And meanwhile, you didn't have mental guards in your head when we were talking about the properties of water or the picture of the duck rabbit. Don't worry, I'm not here to change your mind on any particular issue. I'm just here to talk generally about political divides. So if that did describe you, there's nothing wrong with you. This just seems to be human nature. When we think about social issues, we tend to not think in an open, exploratory way, and instead we think around our preferences. So our preferences sort of act like a center of gravity, and our thinking is bent according to those preferences. By the way, this section might be a little uncomfortable to hear, but I'm trying to explain why we get stuck in this kind of endless fighting over politics, and the answer isn't necessarily a pleasant one to hear. So if we're going to learn about it, we need to be willing to be made a little uncomfortable. Okay, so our preferences can distort our thinking when we think about social subjects. That's primarily an intuitive process. We make these quick, intuitive judgments about politicians, policies, ideas, even entire sides of the political spectrum. When we look at them or think about them, these things just seem right to us, or they seem wrong to us. They seem appealing, or they seem unappealing. It's like we have these taste buds in our minds that get quick tastes of these issues and tell us how we feel about them. So this is coming from what I believe is the best available research to date, mostly captured in the book The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. We found that our social and political judgments depend heavily on these quick, intuitive flashes. So these quick, intuitive flashes shape our preferences on these issues. And then from there, our strategic reasoning comes in to collect evidence and convince ourselves that our intuitions got it right. Or as Jonathan Haidt put it, intuitions come first, strategic reasoning second. So unlike the physical world, which we tend to think about in an open, unbiased way, with these social issues, our intuitions heavily bias us to perceive these issues in personal, particular ways. So you might already see how this is tying into the duck rabbit, but hold on because we're not quite there yet. It turns out that if we want to believe something, our brains essentially search for permission to believe it, which means that if we want to believe something, we have low standards of evidence. We can just find one piece of evidence, even pseudo-evidence, and that's enough to convince ourselves that we got it right. And it's a similar story for things that we don't want to believe. If there's something that we don't want to believe, our brain essentially searches for an escape hatch. We just need to find a single piece of reasoning that gives us permission to not believe it. If you're tracking what I'm saying, this means that we have certain subjects where we don't attempt to understand the full thing and base our beliefs on that, but rather, we selectively look at these subjects in ways that confirm the views that we want to have. Some people look at the subject and want to see a duck, so that's what they see. And other people look at that same subject and want to see a rabbit, so that's what they see too. I'm guessing that you were able to freely look at that picture and either see a duck or a rabbit, and that there were no problems there. But with social issues, we develop a sort of partisan resistance to seeing certain aspects of subjects. So if we get rid of the duck rabbit and instead we think about, say, gun control, and I ask you to freely reflect on both sides of the gun control debate, there's a good chance that you'll actually feel resistance in your brain while you try to do it. This actually seems to be a problem that gets worse the more informed you are. As we become more informed, we become more biased because we're more able to recognize partisan cues of the subject, which again means that we engage in motivated reasoning that's motivated by what we want to believe, leaving us with distorted beliefs. We're also generally not aware of the partiality of our own perspectives, which is a bias that psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls "what you see is all there is." Once we believe we have a coherent understanding of something, we're biased to believe that we're understanding the full thing, when in reality, there can still be important pieces missing. So for example, if you saw a duck rabbit for the first time and looked at it and saw one of the animals, it probably wouldn't occur to you that there's another animal in the picture. Why? Because what you see is all there is. Kahneman thinks that this is a bias that gives us a sort of path of least resistance towards making coherent sense out of the world. As he wrote, "You will often find that knowing little makes it easier to fit everything you know into a coherent pattern. What you see is all there is facilitates the achievement of coherence and of the cognitive ease that causes us to accept a statement as true, which is why people that know less about a subject can be more confident than people that know more about a subject. Having little information can make it easier to make coherent sense out of the subject. It's easier to make sense out of the duck rabbit if you only know about one of the animals. The second animal adds complexity to the duck rabbit, just as it's easier to make sense out of gun control if you only know one side of the issue. Trying to reconcile both sides of the issue adds complexity. We also tend to be congratulatory towards our own views and derogatory towards views that conflict with ours. We tend to think that we're intelligent and that people who agree with us are intelligent, and we tend to think that people that disagree with us are dumb, which is something that's called naive realism. Research there has also shown that we tend to think that our own perspectives are objective. We think we see the world as it really is, and we think the people we disagree with are biased. People who see rabbits think they're smart. They think they see the world how it really is, and they think people who see ducks are stupid and biased, and people who see ducks feel the same way right back at the people who see rabbits. And of course the duck rabbit is an analogy. So if you want a real world example, just swap it out for, let's say, differing opinions on the same political candidate. We've now brought ourselves to a point where we have two factions of people looking at the same subjects in different ways, selectively highlighting certain aspects of the subjects while ignoring others in order to come to their own desired conclusions. Both sides see themselves as right and others as wrong. They see themselves as intelligent and others as stupid. Both sides are unwilling to think outside of their own perspectives. They resist thinking like each other. And then they have to cohabitate. They have to share society together. What I just described is a sketch of our current political landscape. So if the question is, why are we divided? I think the answer is because we're not trying to not be divided. We have all these biases that push us apart from each other, and we're not willing to actively work against them. It's naive to think that one side is entirely right and the other side is entirely wrong. That one side has all the answers and all the evidence, and that the other side is completely ignorant and biased. And of course I'm simplifying by putting this in a binary. In reality, there can be more than two major sides to a subject. The point here is to be willing to think outside of your own perspective. It can't be said that you understand something if you're not willing to do that with an open mind. So hopefully this was helpful to hear. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next time.